Hello everyone, welcome back to SwearTech. For this video, SwearTech will be attempting to do its first ever comparison video of the Realme 7 Pro and the Xiaomi Mi Note 10 Lite. Some may ask, why would I compare these two phones? One is a Pro version and one is a Lite version. Well, both phones are almost in the same price range and it shares almost the same specs. In this video, of course, we will be talking about their specifications like the build quality, internals, platforms, but mainly we will be focusing on their camera performances. And just a heads up, I am not a photographer, so I may not know different terminologies when it comes to photography, so I will be giving you my insights as a normal phone user. Hi, you're watching SwearTech, and this is Essert Young speaking. First, let's talk about the design and build quality. Both phones looks great. They have a very good looking design, but the Mi Note 10 Lite looks and feels more premium because of its aluminum frame. Both the back and front are made out of Corning Gorilla Glass 5 compared to Realme 7 Pro's plastic frame, plastic back, and Corning Gorilla Glass 3 Plus screen. Moving on to the display, both phones features an AMOLED panel. Realme 7 Pro sports a 6.4 inches Super AMOLED screen with 82.7% screen to body ratio, while the Mi Note 10 Lite sports a 6.47 inches curved AMOLED screen. Putting them side by side, you cannot really tell the difference. Both displays are vibrant, bright with deep blacks, but I'm kinda leaning towards the Mi Note 10 Lite because of its beautiful curved edges. Both phones also features an in-display fingerprint scanner. The Mi Note 10 Lite looked slower because of its animation, but both are accurate and reliable. Now let's talk about some other features and the complete spec sheet of both phones. Starting with the Xiaomi Mi Note 10 Lite, it shares the majority of its components with the non-Lite version of this phone. The processor is the same Snapdragon 730G. It packs a huge 5260 mAh battery and runs in under 10 with MIUI 12 on top of it. Realme 7 Pro, on the other hand, is hardly an upgrade over the Realme 6 Pro. The processor is the same Snapdragon 720G. It packs a smaller battery capacity at 4500 mAh and runs on Android 10 alongside with Realme UI. For its memory, you can get either 6 or 8 GB of RAM and 128 GB of internal storage. So here's a side-by-side comparison of their spec sheet. Before we begin the camera comparison, let us first lay down the camera specs. Let us start off with the rear camera setup. Both phones sports a modern-looking back camera module on the upper left side of the phone. The Mi Note 10 Lite's main camera relies on a 64-megapixel Sony IMX686 sensor that produces 64-megapixel photos by default. The ultra-wide camera uses an 8-megapixel sensor behind an f2.2 aperture. Without telephotos on board to help out with depth detection for portraits, there is a dedicated 5-megapixel module. A 2-megapixel unit for close-ups is also present, bringing the total camera count on the back to 4. Moving on to the Realme 7 Pro, it also packs a 64-megapixel lens with Sony IMX682 sensor and an f1.8 aperture. This camera also shoots by default in 16-megapixel, night mode, and optional AI dazzle color are available. Second is the ultra-wide snapper with an 8-megapixel sensor behind an f2.3 aperture. The macro cam is a 2-megapixel sensor with f2.4 aperture but lacks autofocus. And finally, there is a 2-megapixel depth sensor completing the quad camera setup. Okay, so first mode that we're going to test out is the 64-megapixel mode. Photos turned out great, but very much different from one another. Daylight photos from the Mi Note 10 Lite turned out really good. Colors are rendered true to life, and dynamic range is quite wide. As for the Realme 7 Pro, white balance is spot on, and the colors also true to life. We can also praise the high dynamic range and the excellent contrast. Overall, the main camera of both phones shoots pleasant and well-detailed 16 megapixel photos. So here are some of my initial shots for you to compare. Testing out the ultra-wide mode, photos are free of noise, which is great. For its relatively low resolution, both phones takes decent photos. The Realme 7 Pro's dynamic range is average, even when the Auto HDR gets involved. Mi Note 10 Lite's dynamic range is on the narrow end of the spectrum, but not unreasonable for the specs. Here are more sample shots for you to check out. Though both of the quad camera setup do not include a telephoto lens, there is an option for a 2x switch on the viewfinder. It gives you a digital zoomed-in view of the main cam, which produces usable, if not pin-sharp, images. Well, thanks to the high-resolution 64 megapixel sensor, the algorithm of both phones can do some magic and gives you 2x zoomed photo of higher resolution than expected quality. In this department, I'd have to go with the Realme 7 Pro because the results were better, and it gets up to 5x zoom. Not really in good quality, but it's always better to have options. Okay, now moving on to the macro cam. The Realme 7 Pro has a 2 megapixel macro cam. We took a couple of photos. You should be very close to the subject though. The detail isn't that great, and the photos are quite dull. The Mi Note 10 Lite's macro cam lets you get really close to your subject. Its autofocusing capability means that you don't need to be at one very specific distance, which is very handy. And while we are still talking about the main camera, the Realme 7 Pro also shoots portraits with its 64 megapixel snapper with the help of the 2 megapixel depth sensor. The ones we took turned out with average to poor subject detection, but convincing background blur and excellent contrast. Portrait mode works quite well on the Mi Note 10 Lite as well. Subject detection is very good, resulting in clean border areas around the subject. We think that everyone will be satisfied with the portrait photos taken with the Realme 7 Pro and the Mi Note 10 Lite. So here's a side-by-side comparison of the portrait photos we've just shown a while ago. Now let's talk about the front camera. For selfies, the Mi Note 10 Lite packs a 16 megapixel camera in the display notch. The lens has an f2.5 aperture without autofocus. The selfie camera of the Realme 7 Pro has a 32 megapixel quad layer sensor that sits behind an f2.5 lens. Selfies out of the Mi Note 10 Lite come out alright. Detail is good, though there is an artificially sharpened look to the way it is rendered. As for the Realme 7 Pro, the image quality of the selfies are good, the resolved detail is average, but everything is excellent. Contrast, colors, and dynamic. Going back to the main cam, I will be showing you guys a quick night mode photo comparison. Okay, so one last thing that I would like to test out is the video recording. The Realme 7 Pro and the Mi Note 10 Lite captures videos with their main cameras and ultra-wide snappers. Both of them records video up to 4K at 30 frames per second, and there is a 1080p at both 30 frames per second and 60 frames per second. Lowest video resolution that you can get is at 720p at 30 frames per second. So we've tried every recording mode, and here are the results. So that's about it for our phone and camera comparison of the Realme 7 Pro and the Xiaomi Mi Note 10 Lite. What do you think about it? I personally think that both of them are very capable mid-ranger with affordable price tag. It offers an incredible screen, design, battery life, and charging. Camera performance is kinda what we expect from a mid-range phone, if not better. Unfortunately, we haven't tried their gaming prowess, but trust me, Qualcomm Snapdragon never disappoints. So if you are someone who gives priority to the design and build quality, the Xiaomi Mi Note 10 Lite is the phone for you. Now, if you are looking for a phone that can really do the job, might as well get the Realme 7 Pro. Okay, before we end this video, please do consider subscribing to my channel and don't forget to hit the like and notification buttons. Again, this is Esther Young. Thanks for watching Swear Tech.